The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Sorry I'm late. I've just been from a series of probing interviews with the Inland Revenue about my income from podcasting. They're doing a study.
No mai tēnā koutou katoa. This is Gone by Lunchtime. I'm Toby Manhai, Annabelle Lee Mather, kia ora.
Tēnā koe.
Ben Thomas, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Samuel is making everything run very smoothly. Exciting times. We'll get to talk about tax. Always chomping at the bit to talk about tax. We're also going to talk about, what else? We can talk about Australia, our beloved Australia.
Never heard of it.
And some other bits and bobs, maybe a bit of Kiri Allen, maybe a bit of candidate selection, ongoing hellfire. Let's talk about tax, though. The Revenue Minister, the Tax Justice Evangelist, David Parker, commissioned a report just over a year ago, I think, from the IRD, in which they were tasked, following a change in legislation sometime previously that obliged people to provide information about their taxes that isn't solely for the purposes of administration. I think I might have that right, hopefully, who knows. And so the richest families in New Zealand were required to provide their details. Most of them did, not all of them did, but 311 of the wealthiest families of New Zealand provided information to Inland Revenue, who looked at their income, their economic income, drawn not just from their salaries and trust funds, but also from the capital gains they made across incomes. Anyway, the upshot of it all was, ladies and gentlemen, as many of you will have heard, if you listen to this podcast, you know this already, I'm sure, that the effective tax rate paid by the wealthiest New Zealanders is 9.4 cents in the dollar. The effective tax rate paid by the median is 20.2 cents in the dollar. The tax rate paid by hardworking podcasters on median incomes 30, 35, 40, sometimes 50.
If you're a smoker, getting up near 70 to 80% of your income.
120%. Once you factor it all in. Shortness of life.
New Zealand essentially has the narrowest tax base in the world, which is basically a bunch of cleaners and me paying tobacco excise taxes.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to survey the 311 unhealthiest New Zealanders who collectively pay more in tax. Obviously, there's a massive political dimension to this, and we are talking, I should say, on Thursday morning ahead of a speech being given by the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, a pre-budget speech that he is giving in Auckland at lunchtime today. We don't know what's in that speech, so we're flying blind a little bit. But let's leave the political part to one side. Annabelle, this process, I read a column in stuff.co.nz today calling it a kite-flying stunt. Actually, do you think that's true? That was written by someone called Ben Thomas. It seems to me quite a positive empirical exercise to understand better tax distribution in New Zealand, a core pillar of the economy, whatever you think in terms of the way the redistribution system should work. Really good to know this stuff.
I have no idea what a kite-flying metaphor stunt thingy is. What I'd like to say is to the 311 families who were surveyed, if you're looking for additional whānau members, well, you can contact me via this spin-off. Like, I'm really keen
Gone by
to
Lunchtime
join
is
your family.
brought to you by the 311.
It was, I think, to me, it seemed like a valuable exercise. I mean, it's startling and powerful to see those numbers. It's something that's long been suspected, but there was no kind of hard data around it. So it's, fascinating to see, and the news coverage about it is obviously compelling. The thing that I found weird about it, though, is that you deliver this fascinating information that shows the incredible inequity in our tax system, and you quickly follow it up with the statement, but don't worry, we're not going to do anything about it. To me, that seemed bizarre, and I just don't know why they communicated it that way. Like, why would you not say instead, obviously this data is very important and we're going to spend some time considering it, and of course you can expect that we will have a policy announcement before the election that hopes to deal with this issue. But it was just weird that, on one hand, he's almost singing This Little Light of Mine, talking about the speech that he did, shining a light on inequity in the tax system or whatever it is. And then at the same time, they're immediately squashing it all out.
Yeah. Hey, I should take this opportunity to tell listeners that David Parker is on Bernard Hickey's podcast, When the Facts Change, this week, so look out for that. Yes, I mean, maybe it's a bit, David Parker is obviously committed to the idea of a capital gains tax, has been making that case for a long time. The politics part of it, which we're going to come to, is a bit of an immovable force, and, Jacinda Ardern made the captain's call in the 2017 election to kick it, then she made in 2019.
She made a captain's call to have it.
Well,
and then a captain's call to kick it.
Yeah.
Well, a captain's
call to have a tax working group.
But there was also a captain's call not to introduce anything until after the following election, wasn't it? Yeah. And through all that, there is, David Parker has sort of solidly been working nerdily on the numbers. Ben, let's just park that political dimension for a moment. And give you a chance to defend the headline you probably didn't write on your column.
Defend the ultra-wealthy.
Yeah, that's right. Also in that column...
Everybody wants to live in a liberal democracy until they have to pay taxes, eh?
Give us your view on it all, Ben. Also, can you defend using the third person, we, to describe yourself in your column this morning?
First person.
Wow.
The first person, plural.
It's the plural. That's me and the reader.
Thank you very much.
Me and the reader in a close, intimate relationship, exploring this issue together.
You, the queen.
Me and
they, the reader.
Yeah.
The subject. Go on.
Me and the person who's reading this. New Zealand's two finest political analysts. So the objection to the way that this report has been, first of all, done and sort of sold, I suppose, is that if you're a cynic, you would say it's actually not a surprising result that to find out from your year-long study that in a country where we don't tax capital gains, the capital gains of the rich were not taxed. I mean, that's quite an uncontroversial sort of finding, right? And I think there has been a bit of slipperiness there in terms of, what's the effective tax rate? Well, the effective tax rate in terms of and in terms of what is income, or earned income, or what they call economic income. So I think of it as income. I think of the salary that I get. I think of any dividends that I get from shares. I think of the $3 interest that I get, with the $3 shareholder disbursement for being a member of the cooperative bank and a stakeholder in that doomed financial enterprise. But what they calculated in that study, right, and that's also how they calculated the effective tax rate of the middle income earner, right? If you're on about $100,000, you'll pay about 20% of that in income tax. You probably won't see that because your employer will probably deduct it at the source as PAYE. You will also pay an amount in GST, which they estimate at about 2% of your earnings. So you'll probably spend about $2,000, say, on GST if you were throughout the year, in terms of on the goods and services that you buy if you're a middle income earner. For the ultra wealthy, what they did was include the gain in the value of their property, the gain in value of the businesses that they owned, the gain in value of the shares that they owned, which was what we call unrealised capital gains.
Capital gains.
So there's no money
so they haven't
coming
sold
in.
these things in those.
It's not cash in hand that you would be taxed on. It is just the value of the asset you have. Now, if you
just
apply,
like little black holes sucking wealth towards them.
Well, yeah, but then again, so are the middle earners in the middle classes. If they own a house and their Auckland house went up in value $100,000 or $150,000 in 2021, as it most assuredly did if they own a house in Auckland, whatever their income, then you would suddenly their income, according to IRD, that they should have been taxed on goes from $100,000 to $250,000. And then they're paying $20,000 on that. And then they're actually even more undertaxed than the fabulously wealthy, right? And so it's not really an apples and oranges comparison. The numbers have been, the numbers that are presented are correct, but the definitions are kind of juking it in favour of an interpretation which says,
that's a good point. There has been some debate around this kind of measuring of unrealised capital gains, insofar as they're not buying and selling all these assets all the time in order to have a pile of cash that they're then smoking, but they're getting richer. They're getting richer at a phenomenal rate, and in other jurisdictions, that there are various ways in which that wealth
of
can be taxed.
Wealth. Yeah, absolutely. And the question, I think, and this is where it sort of shades into the politics, which is, of course, the most important thing, is, where do you go from this? Because David Parker would like a capital gains tax that, as he foregrounded, as he started his speech about the ultra wealthy, he said, "Look, apropos nothing, I do not believe in taxing the family home."
I'm not here to announce any policies.
Fire exits there. There'll be lunch in 30 minutes. I do not believe in taxing the family home, and I never have. Right? Just housekeeping out of the way. And then he, and so the thing is, that's the kind of first clue that any kind of actual capital gains tax they try to introduce would catch all the investment properties of all the mum and dads many of whom are in this middle income earning range that David Parker cares so deeply about. And so the politics of that is basically, the third rail, it's plastic explosives. It's, he's got to stay far away from it, right? And you've seen that briefings from the 9th floor hosing down the idea of a capital gains tax. Where I think the politics of this comes in is essentially there's a narrative forming that the rich don't pay enough tax, right? Now this is the other thing, is that they pay all the tax that they're required to, right? So and yes, and David Parker David Parker said that. He said
this isn't an exercise in studying tax evasion.
This isn't about tax avoidance, but I think there has been
wait. I mean, avoidance is different to evasion. It's not about evasion.
No.
Avoidance
but this
is
not about
avoidance.
I don't think this is about avoidance. I don't think anyone's suggested this is about avoidance.
Well, it depends.
Because
I mean, avoidance is structuring your affairs in such a way as you minimise your tax outlay, and of course they do that. Of course they do. That's perfectly acceptable.
But I don't think that there's any suggestion that I haven't.
I don't think Parker or anyone is accusing anyone of being devious.
Yeah, but when we say that they're not paying their share, what we don't mean they're receiving the same amount of actual income as or the same proportion of actual income as anyone else, but what they're doing is they're structuring it so that it goes through a winding labyrinth of different Cayman Island trusts and things like that to minimise the amount of tax they pay. The reason that they pay a low amount of tax on this is that it is not something that is taxed in New Zealand.
Sure, but
which
that's
is
still
unrealised.
Yes, that's right. That's the key point. But it's still structured in trusts and different approaches.
But I think that there is a bit of a conflation happening there in the narrative that Parker's creating, right? And trusts are taxed, and companies are taxed, and all these things are taxed, right? So, and I think, again, there's been some narrative slipperiness here, but the major thing that I think Parker wants to achieve, which I think he's, on his way to doing, and I think is the reason that they haven't proposed a particular, any kind of follow-up policy to this, is they just want to create a bit of disaffection towards the wealthy and create the idea that the wealthy aren't paying enough. Because if you say the wealthy aren't paying enough, here's our idea for a capital gains tax, suddenly everyone will start asking, well, what about the family home? What about the land under the family home? What about my land and family
So you're
home
running a
trust?
line, Ben, that this is a kind of envy exercise designed to stir up and eat the rich sentiment.
Which might,
Or is it simply an attempt to try and provide some data? I mean, Parker points out correctly. This is. I don't know if it's unique in the world. It's certainly rare to have this kind of empirical basis to make assessments about the extent to which wealth is taxed. Surely that's a constructive, useful basis for making kind of central assessments about the way that we organise the state.
Yeah, absolutely. But once you introduce it into the political arena and the minister gives a speech on it rather than it just being a technical working paper that the Inland Revenue has done, like Treasury does a lot of the time, and uploads these dusty sort of formula-laden
We shouldn't forget Treasury had a sort of sidecar paper that came out at the same time about tax structures. Don't want to overlook the Treasury. That
but the thing is, it was overlooked, right? Because it didn't quite fit the narrative to the same extent.
Well, it was
this one
doing
does,
a
right?
slightly different thing. I
Well,
think,
that's right.
Assessing the
And so, I don't think it's deliberate. I don't think they have like a 10-step plan, mapped out. But what I think is that they'll be keeping an eye on public sentiment.
Yeah.
If it turns out that there is a big, a popular spontaneous call for the rich to pay more, then you might just see maybe a new top tax rate of, over $250,000, you have to pay 50% or something. And that would, again, not actually pay for that much in terms of social services, but it would further distinguish Labour from National in terms of the signalling of who do we care about, middle-income earners or rich people, or, that kind of thing.
It's interesting timing, because we've had the announcement this week about, making it, allowing New Zealanders to apply for Australian citizenship, and the concern about, a mass exodus of Kiwis to Aussie for the better pay and conditions and all of that sort of stuff. And one thing that Australia does have that, allows them to pay their nurses and all of that stuff better than what we do here is a capital gains tax. So it seems timely that we should be having a discussion about this stuff and the way that it might benefit our society. In terms of the argument about the politics of envy, that may be so, but that's what politicians do. They ramp up emotion to motivate their voter base. This is something that we see National do all the time in terms of the law and order, politics of fear, getting people whipped up to come out and vote for them. I think the risk that the government runs here is that, if this is an exercise to get people talking, to take the temperature of the electorate around what sort of appetite there might be for a capital gains tax, that's fine. If they fail to act on it, though, I think they risk looking like a government who likes to review and not do, and that's something that we've seen over and over again with this government. So I don't think we're going to see a eat the rich tax policy. Personally, I support it. However, this is an issue that needs to be dealt with.
I don't think anyone is really expecting a major tax change in the budget, which is now closing in. Most of the PDFs will have been sent to the printers. And David Parker has said, in response to what the policy outcome from the study might be, all parties will be setting their tax policies in the lead up to the election, which now, let me remind you, is like only 5 months away. The question really is, to your point, Annabelle, David Parker has produced a truly groundbreaking his words study. Is there anything, maybe he's describing the findings to be fair to him, is there anything in the Chris Hipkins project, the bread and butter revolution, the back to basics mindset, the small target strategy running into the election that would make you think that he might consider even for a moment the tax switch? And David Parker has spoken repeatedly about his admiration for Bill English's tax switch, which was when there was a switch that meant that it was revenue neutral, but GST was increased and income tax reduced. Is there any sense at all that the Hipkins approach is consistent with doing something kind of big and bold? I did wonder, that Grant Robertson, who clearly, may be considering whether or not he continues after the next election, is like, maybe this is it. Maybe I got 5 months to do something big and bold. But it feels a bit like, another way of looking at this is that David Parker is being allowed to do his thing from a lectern on an island. Meanwhile, the political continent continues.
I think if they don't do something, they potentially could lose voters across to the Greens who are very clear on this issue.
And Chloe Swarbrick was quite compelling yesterday in a radio interview, making the case in a way that
I think
Labour's reluctant to.
But I think that she fell into this sort of mistake where she said, we've seen the ultra-rich don't pay as much tax as they should. And she said, I think poverty is a choice. We need to acknowledge that now. Having poverty is a choice while we don't tax the ultra-rich. But the thing is, when we compare New Zealand to Australia, the reason Australia can pay for all these good things and better healthcare and more pay for nurses and teachers and, tradies can all own second homes and that kind of thing, it's not because of their tax system. It's because they're a richer country. It's because everyone pays more tax because everyone earns more money. And we can't, I sound like a 1990s Roger Douglas book, but we can't tax ourselves rich. Right, the ultra wealthy that
it's not about taxing ourselves rich. It's about taxing ourselves to be able to provide good services, particularly when it comes to healthcare and education.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, if let's say, I think at the high watermark in 2021, when sort of corporate profits were through the roof because there's all this money and washing in through the through the money printing and quantitative easing and low interest rates of the immediately post-COVID era. And I think that group of 311 families paid $700 million in tax, right? And that was vastly up on a few years earlier. Let's say we get it up to $10 billion. That doesn't change the game in terms of our social services or pay rates for civil servants or anything. It's not as if we are a very rich country, but a small number of people are hoarding the wealth compared to Australia, which is a country that we compare ourselves and that a lot of New Zealanders compare us to when they decide to move over there. We are just not as rich a country. You could get instead of
it would certainly help.
If instead of doubling the amount that these ultra rich pay, you could get the same amount in the New Zealand tax coffers if every New Zealand full-time worker earned $30 more a week. Right? So when you compare it to somewhere like Australia, where everyone earns like 10 grand more a year, there's just no comparison. And, look, again, I sound like an old ACT guy, but the focus being on how do we extract the most from these people, that's the way to become rich, and we can all transfer $20 in tax credits here and working for families here and stuff. That doesn't actually solve your original problem, which is there's not actually enough money to pay for all the things that we want.
How do we get maximum value out of this protein? That's what I want to know. Well, actually, just picking up on that, The Detail had a really good podcast yesterday about nurses going to Australia. And one of the things they talked about is that they don't just go for the money. So, for example, if you're a paediatric nurse in Australia, their rule is that, you only have to take care of 4 babies, whereas in New Zealand, you might be taking care of much more than that, which, exponentially increases the stress and pressure and worry and all of that stuff. So, and that's exactly to do with our tax take, the level of service that we can provide in those hospitals, schools, all of that sort of stuff.
In terms of the kind of raw politics of it, Is there something that Hipkins can do? Because if you've got this as a backdrop, as you put it, Ben, just a sort of cyclorama that suggests that the wealthy are paying less tax than they might do under other circumstances. You don't want to go with a big CGT. You look at the opposition, and Christopher Luxon wasn't too sure-footed at first and didn't answer very eloquently questions around whether or not the tax system was fair. It was much better this morning.
Here's the move. This is free to Labour.
Okay.
A 10%
flat tax rate.
A seventh home tax.
Seventh home tax.
Seventh home tax, so that you catch only Christopher Luxon and people richer than him, and then you force him to defend him. Right?
Yeah, well,
that's the move.
But I mean, you jest, I think. But there is that. There will be a temptation to try and find a way to snooker National, because nothing would suit Labour better than having National having set in a position running into an election where they're defending rich people.
And they already did it with the top tax rate.
And they abandoned that, right? And they did that, and it had to happen. And we knew for a while that was going to have to happen, and it did happen. And Labour would dearly love to put them on the back foot again. And the question is how, because if we talk about a tax switch, you can see one end of the tax switch is straightforward, whether it's a bracket shift, whether it's a tax-free threshold, even up to something like 10,000, to try and do something. Australia has a tax-free threshold, and you could probably find a way to argue that within the cost of living in terms of not being too inflationary, that you're providing it to everybody across the board. Here's a tax cut for everyone if you have but then how do you do it at the other end? There was nothing in any of this reporting that suggested income tax, PAYE, would move the dial, really, in terms of that richest
No, but that's why I think
cohort.
It's impressionistic, right? I think that the political value of this report is to create a general kind of sentiment amongst the working stiffs like us that rich people, quote unquote, aren't paying their fair share, and so if Hipkins decides to introduce a new top tax rate that kicks in at $250,000, we'll be like, well, that sounds fair.
Yeah.
That's reasonable.
Weighing in with soybeans and a baby show straight out of Norburn, Missouri, we have Soybean Festival. From Hayward, Wisconsin, at 73 years young with the world's largest muskie statue, put it together for Muskie Fest. Finally, packing a punch with fire dancing and a pet costume contest, the Roseau, Minnesota Fall Harvest Fest. One of these festivals could win $100,000 in the Cenex Hometown Throwdown. You decide. Cast your vote at CenexHometownThrowdown.com. Cenex, powered locally.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Let's talk about Australia, which we've already touched on a few times. A few days before Anzac Day, Chris Hipkins went to Brisbane. He arrived there after an announcement that morning that Anthony Albanese had reversed a decision taken by John Howard, I think, 20-something years ago, which Helen Clark pretended was a good thing, which essentially made reduced the kind of citizen status of New Zealanders in Australia.
Is that true?
It was presented as a good thing for both countries.
Helen, eh?
Yeah.
Honestly, she's still got me blocked on Twitter, by the way. Keep going.
It's a good thing for both parties. It's a win-win.
That had created a special visa category, but basically it meant that it was much harder. There were many more hurdles you had to jump if you were a New Zealander who was seeking citizenship in Australia. That's been a sort of thorn in the side. Jacinda Ardern had worked quite hard on that. I think John Key even before that, and then Hipkins finished it off, and so it was hailed as a positive thing. And then there was quite swiftly a discussion about whether or not this was actually. David Seymour had a good line, whether or not Chris Hipkins had been played like a didgeridoo, I think was the line, was it? And that, in fact, this was going to create a fresh exodus of... sorry, Annabelle's just checked and Helen Clark appears to have unblocked
no.
Sorry,
wrong.
it's still blocked by Helen Clark on Twitter. I'm still blocked by Judith Collins on Twitter.
You are?
So if you're listening, Judith, let's make up. Anyway, the question is, now that this is all changed, should we relocate the podcast to Australia?
Yes.
Belzo?
Like the Whit Sundays, somewhere semi-tropical like that, or are you thinking more like metropolitan, like Melbourne or something?
Yeah,
you mean relocate our headquarters from the British Virgin Islands?
Yeah.
where the Gone by Lunchtime Trust is currently located.
Yeah. Shoot through by lunch, shoot through by chow down time.
Yeah.
GBLT number 6 Limited LLC.
What do you think, Annabelle Cobber? Is this a net positive? Obviously, in a way, it's quite good for Albanese potentially because there's a lot of New Zealanders there in that country with the snakes and the spiders, and there's some votes in that potentially. It's a really smart time to do it from their point of view because there is a worker shortage, and there's not going to be that kind of knee-jerk response. They're coming over here and stealing our jobs because everyone is desperate for more nurses, teachers, and so on.
It's a very, very, very good thing, and I think, we should acknowledge the work that Jacinda Ardern did in this area. This is the lives of 700,000 New Zealanders who live in Australia, who at times were being rendered completely vulnerable, things like bushfires and all of that, not able to access support, kids not able to go to university, all of that horrible stuff, blatant discrimination against New Zealand citizens, so it's a wonderful thing. In terms of how it could benefit New Zealanders here, in an ideal world, I would like to think that businesses in New Zealand have to raise their game and start competing against Australian businesses in terms of the salaries that they offer New Zealanders and being far more competitive. I fear that what we'll do is just feed our addiction to cheap labour and bring in, fill our labour shortage by bringing in new migrants to the country, and that will keep us as the low wage economy that we are.
I mean, Ben, whether or not this makes Australia more attractive is kind of moot, but we could have asked already, what is it about the higher wage, lower cost, functioning public transport, proper operating city nature of Australia that attracts New Zealanders there?
This is the thing, right? There's sort of a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, but this is the reality. You go to a small town on the East Coast. Why wouldn't you, if you're a young person, just dropped out of school, why wouldn't you go over and be a builder in Australia and earn $100,000 a year instead of, I've friends on the East Coast who, who have extraordinarily sort of, valuable skill sets in terms of local knowledge, sort of, history, that kind of thing. And, they go and work in Australia and do forklifts and stuff because that pays much better. That's the way to support your family,
Yeah.
And, I don't think it's necessarily bad that, that we have this kind of, sort of vacuum effect where, our people get sucked to Australia and then we suck talent out of, parts of the developing world. And, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. That's not really what keeps our wages down. What keeps our wages down is like low productivity, that we don't sell enough stuff. We don't, the danger is, of course, that, when you get higher levels of immigration, you get scapegoating and stuff. It's taken us 5 years to recover from the 2017 election, where everybody used the, what was the euphemism then? It was like overburdened infrastructure.
Yeah.
and pretty much every party, I think, apart from National, campaigned on that. And it was pretty ugly. And what it led to was skills shortages, even outside of Australia, even when people were sort of stuck here because of COVID, so I mean, it's a very, very good thing for New Zealanders in Australia. It's a very good thing for Australia. I mean, it was really only sort of the same sort of, shooting yourself in the foot kind of political populism on behalf of the Australians that stopped this from happening earlier. Of course, New Zealand migrants are much better than most Australian workers, in the sense that migrants to most countries are better workers because they're the people who are motivated, who are enterprising, who are willing to uproot their whole life to go and make a go of it somewhere else.
And that's kind of the sucky bit, is that our migrants that go to Australia, they get to go over and have an awesome lifestyle. And the migrants that come to New Zealand get like shit wages, shit housing.
I mean, it depends where you're coming from, right?
It's not relevant.
Okay, good. Well, I think we've solved that, and we just need to decide whether we go for Sydney or Melbourne. I think maybe.
I'd like to go to Melbourne.
Okay.
I think
Darwin.
Yeah. Townsville.
One of my friends lives in Darwin, and it's like they had some floods.
Wow.
And they were like, oh no, deadly floods because like 2 people died or something. But then twice as many people died just from this like bacteria that lives 2 meters under the earth that was disturbed by the floods.
Oh my God.
It's classed as like a grade 1 bioweapon by the United States military. And it's just like in
such
gardens.
a dangerous place. You see the picture of people going, oh, I'm just nipping off for a swim. And it's like there are crocodiles everywhere. That whole place is just absolutely terrifying.
Like invisible jellyfish.
Everything.
The plants, the animals,
and
the
fucking
humans.
The humans are terrifying. Absolute shocker. Hey, quickly, a couple of things to rule off. The sort of main task of journalists in New Zealand, enterprising journalists in New Zealand over the last maybe 4 to 6 weeks, has been twofold. One, digging up the PDFs on the Electoral Commission site to look through for donations while watching TV, and the other one just scrolling down the Facebook pages of whoever's been announced as the candidate for whatever party. And
honestly, I reckon, Ben, like if you wanted to create an alternative revenue stream for your company, like you guys could hire yourselves out to be like professional Facebook scrollers,
just scrollers.
for political parties.
Scrollforyou.co.nz.
Yeah.
Do you ever do that? Is that part of your work at
Vic
Capital
PR? Facebook pages?
Just scroll.
I've never thought about that.
You could do a kind of preemptive one where you basically you could make some money doing this. It might be illegal. I don't know. The 311 are probably busy doing this. You scroll and then you find stuff and you screen grab
screenshot it,
and then you say to them, "Look, I could send this to Andrea Vance, or you could."
Blackmail.
Send me a check. Is that blackmail?
Yeah.
Is that allowed? No. Okay.
Or is it data banking and then offering people
it's
the
reputation
opportunity
protection.
to buy? Yeah.
It's just enhancing reputation
Very
in the
much
political
how you
sphere.
frame it.
Yeah,
it's not really blackmail.
No.
It's
anyway. So if you're looking to
greymail, it's shades of greymail.
Not to be encouraged. Anyway, a couple of things. So first, that Kiri Allen was discovered by One News to have taken donations from Ming Foon and his wife in two forms. One was a cash one, and one was in kind for electorate office. Critically, this was before she was in cabinet, let alone justice minister. Some responded saying this is a non-story. This is a blow up. It is a story, isn't it? When the Race Relations Commissioner is making donations, whether or not the sin is greater on his part than anyone else, it's not a breach of the cabinet manual, and she shouldn't be hauled over the coals. But it's a story.
He didn't have any accountability to her at the time the donations were made. So I think she's probably in the clear for accepting the donation at the time.
And clearly hadn't declared that, but has now. And that I don't think anyone is suggesting there was any kind of nefarious or underhand operation.
When you're appointed as a minister and you become justice minister and you're sort of... Well, she wasn't a minister in their first term, was she? No.
Don't think so, unless it was right at the end. I don't think so, yeah.
And so... you would sort of think, in the excitement of becoming a minister, you probably don't go, oh, shit, were any of the people who are in agencies for which I hold ultimate responsibility on my donations list, 2 years ago or a year ago? You probably don't. I think you can give them the benefit of the doubt there. Ming Foon, that's an interesting one because I initially sort of thought, I'm sympathetic to the Chris Hipkins argument, which is that, in the old days, you did have groups who would donate to every political party. The big corporates used to do this. Contact Energy, say, used to donate $20,000 to Labour, $20,000 to National, 10 to the Greens, 10 to ACT, say. And that was sort of seen as a kind of service to democracy or something. Some people have argued to me that it's not quite the same. If you've got a public servant, somebody whose role... whose role is kind of contingent on political appointment, that, even donating to all the parties is still sort of maybe not a great look. In Ming Foon's case, he says he's been doing this for years, probably since he was the mayor, maybe even before then, to, say, both candidates. Some people have said, well, then you'd have to be very careful that both the amounts are exactly the same. You donate to every party. I'm not too sure about that, but I think the question would centre around the question of, is it appropriate in any circumstances for a public servant to sort of, make a public donation, where they know, where it's a non-anonymous donation, they know that it's come from the public servant to a politician. I haven't actually formed a view on that personally.
Probably best not. I think that's probably a reasonably good rule, isn't it? Like, just best not. I mean, I see what you mean. I think there's probably a reasonably good argument for a noblesse oblige for companies to just sort of, fund across the board. But I think if you are an appointment...
But see, when Sky City did it, Sky City used to do the same thing.
Know, that's also a best not.
And you definitely, you know that they're not just doing it as a service to democracy, right? They're doing it so that everyone remembers they gave the party $20,000, and the fact that they've given it to everybody doesn't sort of. So I don't know. I don't know. I think if you accepted it and. Yeah, I haven't formed a view.
Annabelle, have you formed a view?
I'm a bit like Ben. Like, I don't have a super strong view on it either way. I think it's a story, not an incredibly significant scandal that's been unveiled. I don't think Kitty's a crook. I don't think Ming's a crook. I think probably it was a bit of a misstep on Ming's part. I recognise that it's a part of his whānau tikanga to give those koha to politicians, but I think once you become a public servant, it's probably wise to hold back on doing that until you've finished fulfilling that role, and you're no longer answerable to any government figure or anything like that. I also think that, while we're demanding transparency in terms of lobbyists and all of that we should uphold those tikanga right across the board. So, like Ben, I don't think any major crime has been committed here, probably just some poor decision-making that's now blowing up in the face of the players.
All right, moving on to Ross Agnew, the South Otago farmer.
Wait, who's he?
He's the author of Fart Tax Blues. That was his seminal work.
Oh, is he Stephen Jack? Who are we talking about?
He's a poet.
Is he the guy that wrote the poem?
He's the guy that wrote the poem. He's the guy that wrote the poem that Stephen Jack, who most likely would have gone on to become Prime Minister after pulling off an incredible upset victory in Tidy, was it? Yeah. Which, I mean, yeah, look, he wasn't going to win that seat. Someone didn't scroll far enough down his feed. Does this point to an ongoing failure in national selection, or is it a little bit of a storm in a teacup? And Ben, critically, a reminder of the kryptonite that poetry is for politics.
There's been way too much bad poetry, political bad poetry.
I just think it's an important
People need to
lesson.
cut it out.
Yeah, just steer clear.
Stop. And can I just say, in terms of the quality of that particular poem, like the greatest New Zealand poetry was featured all over the bus stops of Waiheke in the 1980s. I'm thinking of Jules, like love is gold, and love is made in the back of a Holden. And I tell you what, his poem would not have have been graffitied over. That one was and actually that one was in the toilets at Onitangi Beach. Love is gold, and love is made in the back of a Holden. I think it was also in the Rocky Bay bus shelter, if I recall correctly.
I'm going to try and find this Ross Agnew poem and give you a few lines to talk us out. But briefly, Ben.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's as much of a controversy as some of National's detractors have suggested. In seats where you're not going to win, where the local electorate is not particularly strong, you won't always get winners. There will be people who have to just fill up the dance card, make up the numbers, punch the time card. It is better if these guys sort of, after the second or third sort of gross Facebook post, you probably want to move them on. But and it suggests that there was a bit of a lack of care and attention taken by the electorate committee. Luxon could justifiably feel let down there. At the same time, I think what did Catherine Ryan on RNZ say? She said it was in the tradition of bawdy verse more than sort of being particularly offensive or rancorous. It was just it was somebody who obviously wasn't cut out for public life. Probably good that he's out of it now, but I think that's about as far as it goes. You live and you learn.
Okay, well, that's enough of that. Let's end the podcast while saying thank you to Sam, thank you to members, thank you to Ben and Annabelle, and I'm going to give you the penultimate stanza of Ross Agnew's poem "Enough Is Enough,"
Beautiful.
which was posted by
Uncle.
What would have been the future Prime Minister Stephen Jack, and led to his downfall. I well remember someone saying, "We won't bring in new tax," but the one they put on vehicles just broke the camel's back. Regulations thrust upon us, trying to drag the country down, and since the last election, same old circus, just more clowns.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.